Welcome back to A Year of Final Fantasy, and we are still in the month of Garuda, and here's a sort of fun video. I've been wanting to make this one for quite a while, and that's the cameos of Final Fantasy characters in other games and franchises. So these are also going to be the games that appear outside of the Final Fantasy franchise, so no spin-offs or anything that are eligible like that. If I did all the spin-offs and all the cameos, we'd be here for hours. Also up for grabs are blatant homages to the characters, even though they may not technically be the Final Fantasy character. Also, this is not an exhaustive list. I'm sorry if I don't talk about the one that you knew of. If you do hear one that maybe I didn't mention that you think is neat, leave it in the comments below. I'd definitely like to hear that. Let's see what we have here. First off, we have, strangely enough, Mario Hoops 3-on-3, where several different generic job classes make some appearances here that you can play as. You can be the ninja, you can be a Moogle, you can be a Cactuar, you can be a white mage, and a black mage. These are selectable teammates, and there are some other Final Fantasy nods that are not nearly as blatant that appear throughout the game as well. Next up, we have Star Ocean Till the End of Time, and this cameo is going to be recurring in a few games, but we do see an NPC flower girl that's clearly intended to be Aerith, not Aerith. Aerith, I know it's wrong, I don't care. In Deus Ex Human Revolution, there are also posters hung on areas which display the newest Final Fantasy game, Final Fantasy 27. Deus Ex was bought by Eidos, which was bought by Square, and so it technically falls under the Square Enix bracket, but it's not a Final Fantasy game. Anyway, artwork of Cloud and Aerith can also be seen throughout the game Parasite Eve, another Square game. Tifa can be found on a poster in Xenogears and Solaris, and there's several different references to various summons in the game The World Ends With You, and those summons here are just in name of the moves. So they're Golem, Shiva, Ifrit, or Hellfire as they call it, and Bahamut. Of course, one of the biggest games with many cameos, and this probably falls under my rule of not mentioning it, but I'm going to do it anyway, I guess, and that's just the Kingdom Hearts series as a whole. So if you want to think of Kingdom Hearts as a separate thing, there you go, you got your shout out, but it really is, in my opinion, a Final Fantasy game. But whatever, anyway, let's move on. In the PlayStation game Legend of Mana, which is a fantastic game, you can actually see black chocobos that you have to fight, and there's yellow chocobos that you can keep as pets. In the game Life is Strange, there's a reference to Final Fantasy's Spirits Within, calling it the best sci-fi movie ever, which is actually pretty funny. In the game Secret of Evermore, there are a few cameos, being Cecil from Final Fantasy IV, who's an NPC who runs a shop. There's Terra, there's Locke, Moggs, Drago, Realm, Umaro, and they can all be seen in a Colosseum crowd. There's also a Chocobo egg that appears as an item. Bahamut appears as a boss in Bowser's Keep in Super Mario RPG, and what's interesting about Super Mario RPG is there's a general kind of Final Fantasy amalgamation that's inspired as a cameo, and it's in the form of the boss Kulex, who's a Dark Knight, and during the battle there are 4 classical elemental crystals, Earth, Fire, Wind, Water, and the battle music itself is in the form of Final Fantasy VI boss music, and whenever you beat the boss, the Final Fantasy fanfare plays, so I really like that cameo. That's a really interesting one. Another not very well talked about game, but an amazing game nonetheless, is 3D Game Heroes, and that has quite a few references, which are all homages to action-adventure, RPG kind of genre stuff. First, there's a character named Deke, who works on airships. Obviously, it's Sid backwards. There's a town named Colnaria, which is referring to Cornelia from Final Fantasy I. There's a magic user under the name of Newman, which is a reference to Minwu in Final Fantasy II. And there's a particular bridge crossing that you'll see, which you can get the Final Fantasy I kind of iconic view that I used in my very first month back in January 2017. I really like that iconic over-the-hill view, and we do get that here in 3D Game Heroes. Also, there's a completely useless item that you can get in the form of a ribbon, which is obviously the joke prize in Final Fantasy VII's Golden Saucer Battleground. It's completely useless. Drove myself insane years thinking about what that was used for. Turns out, nothing. But maybe, maybe it resurrects Aerith. But we'll come to that later. Another Aerith cameo comes in the form of a character in World of Warcraft of all games named Aerith Primrose. In Scribblenauts, you can summon a black mage, white mage, and red mage by typing their names, and in Lunar 2 The Eternal Blue, a chocobo can be seen within the game. In No More Heroes 2 Desperate Struggle, there's a character named Skelter Hector, which is clearly an homage to Cloud in his look and demeanor. In Elder Scrolls 3, a dungeon contains a number of labeled. In Elder Scrolls 3 Morrowind, a dungeon contains a chamber labeled as the Kefka Burial, obviously referring to the Final Fantasy VI antagonist. In Tales of Symphonia, there's another Aerith Flower Cellar reference. And in the Simpsons game, they make a reference to Shinra, as an electric company is named Ren Sha. In the roguelike game called Enter the Gungeon, there's a gun known as Avalanche of Bullets, and its description reads, "According to legend, 2 men were fitted with one of these hands. One the left, the other the right. the next time they met, only one would walk away. That's obviously referring to Barrett and Dine, and I don't want to say anything else about that. And Final Fantasy characters have also appeared in Adult Swim's Robot Chicken, which is pretty great. All of the ones that I found were actually referencing Final Fantasy VII, that being the most widely played Final Fantasy, but it's still really cool. During the old Captain N, the Game Master TV show, you probably aren't even old enough to remember it, but there are references to Final Fantasy I in the form of Matoya, the Prince of Alfheim, and Astos. In a comedy sketch show known as Mad TV, if you haven't seen Mad, you're missing out, Tifa Lockhart appears as a contestant, and in the comic Order of the Stick, Ellen and Thog put on their disguises that look like Locke and Mog from Final Fantasy VI. And finally, one of the biggest surprising cameos, obviously I had to save this for last, but it is Super Smash Bros. Wii U, where Cloud was added as a character, and the entire internet collectively shit itself whenever that was announced, me included. So I'm gonna leave it there. Probably not a good place to leave it, but I probably didn't even scratch the surface of the hundreds upon hundreds of references and nods and all of that in various manga, comic books, everything. I'm sure there's a ton more out there, but these are the biggest ones that I wanted to mention. And most of them I've actually seen for myself, so they're kind of a special part in my childhood gaming history. Anyway, next time we're going to be talking about what is possibly the most fundamental thing to Final Fantasy itself, and that is the crystals. Other than that, as always, until next time, Crystal Warriors, keep on gaming.